the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode features a different topic and a guest who shares their experience and knowledge with us. Tune in and learn something new with BankTalk podcast.
Hi, and welcome to BankTalk. I'm Charlie Kelly, your host and partner at Remedy Consulting. Today, we are talking to an executive recruiter. This is a podcast I've been trying to get together for some time. Just haven't been able to find the right executive recruiter within our industry. And my theory for BankTalk was to spend a little bit of time trying to talk to somebody who does a lot of recruiting in the industry, that maybe just kind of knows some things that we don't as listeners about, what it takes to hire within the industry, maybe some of the caveats of their job and, why that might be important to us as we both retain and recruit folks into our bank or credit union. So without further ado, let's get to BankTalk. Okay, welcome back to BankTalk. Today I have with me BJ Berrettini from AJ Consultants. BJ is the executive director. BJ, thank you for joining us on BankTalk today.
Charlie, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
But what does that space look like these days?
So, Charlie, AJ Consultants provides best-in-class executive search services across all lines of business in primarily the community and regional bank space. We've also worked with some credit unions from time to time. And frankly, the credit union practice is something I have a personal interest in expanding in the coming months and years. We originally launched in 2009. Our firm was built on placing commercial banking talent in both credit and lending, but we have since expanded our services into every line of business. And today, most of our time is spent on filling strategic retained searches throughout middle management, the C-suite, and at the board level as well. For example, right now we are actively consulting on a few searches, including a CEO succession plan for a $2 billion mutual bank, a CFO, chief financial officer at a $3 billion community bank, chief payments officer at a $4 billion regional bank and fintech, and a director of accounting position at a $4 billion mutual holding company. And this is in addition to a number of, strategic level individual contributor roles. But in this particular industry, there are search partners that range from, 100% contingent search firms that are generalists to specialized firms like AJ Consultants that ultimately just focuses on one specific niche. And as a result, we chose this niche because we feel that we bring the most value to our clients because we know all the players in the specific geographic areas that we service, and we can quickly find the best talents for our clients.
Okay, great. Well, no, I appreciate that. And I think it's, as you and I talked, I had one foot in a recruitment game many, many years ago, and I find it fascinating. And the reason that I wanted to get you on the BankTalk podcast today was because I always think it's interesting to see your industry from the eyes of somebody who has to recruit into the industry. And by that, I mean, you're probably both recruiting from the industry and into the industry. I don't think it's real frequent that a CEO gets the chance to sit down with his underlings, the rest of the C-suite and say, hey, how am I doing? Right? Like what's my reputation out there? How are we doing as a brand? Do people want to come to work here? People want to stay working here. Either they don't have the guts or they don't have the ability to pull that off. So I thought it'd be just kind of nice to talk about what it takes to recruit somebody and, maybe just have a little conversation around what that industry looks like and what it looks like from your perspective. What's the hardest role to fill? If I were to say just generic, what's the hardest role to fill, or what makes a very difficult role to fill in your opinion?
Well, Charlie, my answer to this question, I think, would vary from year to year, month to month, week to week, depending on
Whatever you're working on today. Sure.
On market conditions, on economic influences.
Well, maybe give me the factors. Give me the factors that are, make it difficult.
Well, it's hard to nail that down. I think the hardest role to fill is where hiring authorities and those affected by the hire itself are not on the same page. I think whatever the line of business is, whatever the specific role, I think the hardest role to fill is one where the needs assessment is not proactively discussed with purpose prior to launching the search. The hardest role to fill is where the hiring authority has champagne tastes on a beer budget, right? The size, the charter, the structure, the location of the institution sometimes, plays a role in how challenging the search might be. But I think the hardest position to fill is always the one that's not set up for success.
That's a really good answer to that question. If I'm interviewing with the CFO, the CEO, and the board, and all three of them have different expectations, they're going to ask different questions. The person's going to come out a little confused. I would imagine it just makes for a very difficult opportunity to pull that person out of whatever they're doing today and moving them into this type of a role.
Without question. Yep. Candidates are smart. They're going into these situations and they're interviewing the hiring managers. They're interviewing the institution, right? So, and they can sense if not everybody's on the same page, so imagine a CEO succession plan and spearheading a search for a successor where members of the board have slightly opposing goals for the institution, where, say, one of the members of the search committee is happy with the status quo or they want to grow slowly, go over the course of the next 10 years. Whereas another member, wants to partner with fintech groups and build 5 new branches and expand their lines of business and their product offerings, right? Those types of processes are very difficult to navigate from a search partner standpoint because we're trying to make everybody happy. But if those opposing views spill over into the interview process, it really complicates the search. And unfortunately, I think whether it's at the CEO level or even at a commercial lender level, where, to bring things down a notch from the C-suite, say a bank is looking to hire a, commercial relationship manager, but credit and lending have a combative relationship. There's an ebb and flow. There's a yin and yang to credit and lending. But if they're not collaborative, that type of opposition is going to come out during the interview process. And unfortunately, the hiring managers are going to lose great talent if the candidates sense that.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that the majority, if you're doing, let's say, a retained search, is it fair to say that the majority of the candidates you're putting in front of the client are currently employed? Or can you give me a rough mix? Is it 80% are employed, 20% are not, or is there no real good percentage in the industry around that?
We'll be right back.
If you're dealing with a technology vendor, consider giving Remedy Consulting a call. At Remedy, we're dedicated to helping our clients get the most out of their tech spend. If you're considering changing one of your major tech providers or are renewing a contract with a vendor, the Remedy team may be able to add some value. Our clients enjoy our deep experience working inside these major vendors, and that background helps us ask questions which eliminate headaches and expense for our clients. Sometimes that's immediate relief, in the way of your vendor invoices, and sometimes it comes in the form of contract language protection for a strategic move that you may want to make several years later. The group of experts at Remedy have years of experience in core systems, digital, mobile, payments, item capture, commercial banking, pretty much the whole gamut of technology for financial institutions. Remedy approaches the BankTalk podcast the same way we approach our client engagements. We always try to fill some knowledge gaps, but also just have enough life experience stories to remain entertaining. So if you're renewing a technology contract or you have projects going on, just need another opinion or a project manager from outside your organization, reach out to us at remedyconsult.net. Thank you, and we appreciate you downloading the BankTalk podcast. Now let's get back to our episode.
I never really gathered the data on that, but I can tell you that it's less than 5% are
Unemployed. Yeah.
Okay. Without question. Our partners, they pay us to go out into the field, right, into the marketplace and find the best talent possible. And the best talent possible commonly are gainfully employed. They are being proactively retained by their employer, and their job satisfaction is very high. And the reason that they are interested in pursuing another opportunity that we present them with, it's because they can't achieve that level at their current bank because their manager and they are the exact same age, and or the opportunity just simply doesn't exist for a number of other reasons.
I'm going to start with the most recent topic, and that is non-competes. But not long ago, there was a ruling that said non-competes are no longer legal. It still has sounds like it still has some legal challenges to go through. But if non-competes are no longer legal, what does that mean to your industry? What does that mean? Because there is a banking exemption, as I understand it.
And I think it's important to point out that obviously this is very fresh. This just popped, 2 weeks ago. The FTC has been mulling this over for at least a year, if not a year and a half. I think when this was launched, they requested that whoever would possibly be impacted, whether it be on the organizational side or on the employment side, that they provide comments. They comment as to how this would affect them. And tens of thousands of people sent in comments on this. And if you read the rule, which I read part of it, there's 510 pages. So I sifted through this because I was interested for obvious reasons. I did not read the whole thing.
Sure.
But if you go and read this rule, within the rule, they reference many of these comments. In fact, I would say at least half of the pages are ultimately comments from the individuals that would be affected. So bottom line, it's new, it's fresh, haven't completed a deep dive, but from what I have read and discussed with a few chief human resources officers within financial institutions, the banks do not fall under the FTC jurisdiction, number one. So that's why there's an exemption, but the FDIC could choose to apply the non-compete clause rule to banks. And then in that case, the FDIC could then adopt, right? From what I understand.
Okay. All right. So there's a bit of an exemption there, but only because maybe the FCC doesn't overrule the FDIC in that subsegment. And I know there were a couple other ones, right? There were some tradespeople organizations and some other ones that seem like they might have been exempted. But again, there must be a clause within the FCC guidelines or something that allow for, don't necessarily allow them to overrule it. They got to push down to the other organization or something like that.
Correct.
You did a good job of answering that, but let's just pretend for a moment that it does apply to banking. Is that a good thing or a bad thing from both the bank's perspective versus the employees, or is it irrelevant? Give me your take on that.
Well, my take on non-competes are, in general, I do think that they limit competition. I do think that they limit career growth for many people. Being someone who has personally had non-competes throughout my career, it has definitively limited some growth and some opportunities. But looking at it from the company standpoint, companies spend time in training and invest in the employee. I understand why those are in place, but I do think that this is a good thing, in my opinion. I think it's a good thing that those who have been restricted by non-competes can go out and start a new business, or they can potentially move to another employer. So often in my position, I put myself in the shoes of those I'm trying to help, whether it's on the hiring manager side or on the candidate side. That is the best way for me to be effective in helping them, in being of service. When I do that on the candidate side, one of the questions I asked every candidate that I talk to is, please rate your job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10. And then whatever the number they tell me, I say, okay, they say 6. I say, great. How do you make it a 10? Right. And they all have valid answers and they've all thought about this. How do you get to a 10 in terms of job satisfaction? Right. If they're at a bank and they have a non-compete or a non-solicit, which we'll talk about, that acts as a non-compete, but the company culture is off, or for whatever reason, they would love to leave and go work for a competitor, but they feel stuck. That is a terrible feeling. It's a terrible position to be in because it affects your whole life, personally and professionally. Not having that restriction, I think, would improve job satisfaction across the board, and I absolutely think that it would improve competition. So that's my answer to that.
Okay. No, and that's a good answer. And you did bring up non-solicit. So that was really the second, as part of 7A of this question. But I think that the perspective from the owner of that business or the board or whatever would probably be, I'm okay if BJ leaves as long as he doesn't take all my commercial clients away. In other words, obviously you built up relationship, but you've done it on my payroll, right? And so you give me your perspective on the non-solicit, which in my opinion means, you can leave, but you can't solicit my clients that you've been working with over the last few years. What do you think of that?
Okay. So it's important to point out that banks commonly deploy non-solicit agreements to most, if not all, revenue generating talent on the line. And these agreements, again, are different from non-competes, but they can act as a non-compete for, say, usually up to 12 months, right? So a commercial banker, from one bank can move to another bank in that market, but they can't solicit those particular clients, right? For up to a year. Now, I have placed a few, if not many, commercial bankers that have non-solicits, and 9 out of 10 times they're not enforceable. In order to enforce a non-solicit, you have to have definitive reason and evidence that the commercial lender solicited their clients. If their client calls them directly, if it's a true non-solicit, they haven't solicited the client. The client has reached out to the commercial lender.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't violate the non-solicit.
So it doesn't violate the non-solicit. But again, it all comes down to the verbiage within the agreement. And some non-solicits specifically say that you cannot directly or indirectly solicit a client for business. That means, from my understanding, again, I'm not an attorney here, but that means that even if the client reaches out to you, you can't service that relationship at another institution.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Because I would think that, right? I mean, I would say there's an argument on both sides. The argument for the bank is always, hey, I've been paying your salary for years. And as part of that salary payment, you've obviously solicited because I've told you to solicit customers. You've done your business, right? So I can see it from their side. And I can also see, I think you made a really good point on, you can do all that as a bank and still have a terrible culture, right? And if you do that, you shouldn't have the ability to enslave your, any of your employees. So if you pay the payroll, but you don't provide an environment that is going to allow them to grow, I suppose that's the two sides of the coin, isn't it?
It is. Most banks that are A players in their space and they're attracting and retaining the best talent, you talk to the leaders at those institutions and they're going to say, I'm not going to stop this individual from leaving. I don't want them to leave, but I have mentored this person and all of my people so that they can either stay or they can go and they could fill their career somewhere else. And usually they don't fight. the non-solicit. It's
Okay.
it's very uncommon for that to happen. Usually, and this is again years of experience, over a decade of experience in servicing banks, I've only seen that happen twice. And
Where they've tried to enforce it?
where they try to enforce it. But it was the individual that left took company files in both cases, took files, took lists, took data, right?
Yeah, it's pretty egregious. Yeah.
And because of that, they had to make an example and they had to fight. In both cases, they won, because there was a ton of evidence that proved that the individual was specifically leaving to target the bank's client base, and it was done in
They took the internal material.
fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
So the banks.
No, that's good. That's a good. I like the perspective on it. And again, like you said, more to come on this. I'm sure that these rulings will have to stand probably a legal challenge and a few other things, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
They're already being challenged, and this new rule does not go into effect until September. So banks and those that would be affected by this, other organizations outside of banking, have between now and September to get their ducks in a row and see how this would affect them. It's important from a non-compete standpoint to point something else out as well. While 99% of employees, whether they're on the line or not, within banks don't have a non-compete, like I said earlier, they have a non-solicit. The top 3 people do. CDO, COO, CLO, Chief Lending Officer, they do commonly have non-compete agreements. But they're executives of the bank. And under this rule, senior executives are exempt. So anyone, and how they define senior executive in this rule is anyone who earns over, I think it's over $150,000 in change, and they have policy-making decision capabilities. So that rule does not apply to senior executives. You can't have a CEO that has, a change of control agreement and a contract decide, oh, I'm going to leave, right? And then, take all this data with them and leave the bank.
Okay, so BJ, I want to switch tactics on you here and ask you one more question related that I think is just kind of a big one in the industry, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. But I want to spend a little time on work from home. How important is work from home in the folks that you're recruiting? Obviously, COVID, we went through the whole industry went through a lot of things, right? And I get this question a lot from CEOs when they're trying to decide whether or not their teams should work from home and just, how this thing's going to shake out over time. To the best of my knowledge, office space is still, underutilized. And that speaks to the fact that people are still working from home. But when you're recruiting somebody, do you get that as a question very often, or how often does that come up? And
okay. So, definitely a great question. Very relevant. Certainly something that remains a hot button topic to this day. And frankly, it comes up on every search.
It does. Okay.
When I'm conducting my due diligence and my needs assessment, I specifically ask about the institution's work from home policy. And then we discuss how that policy can hurt or help their chances in landing their targeted candidate. The current expectation around remote work varies greatly from the bookends, right? The 100% in office to come and go as you please. And, I can tell you that there has been a shift by many of the bigger banks to pull all or most of their employees back into the office.
Back in. Okay.
Back in. Yes. And frankly, why is it bigger banks that have a tendency to do this? I think it's because it's easier to police when everyone's doing it. Right. When you have 100,000 employees, it is very difficult to have a customized approach, per team. This team can, work remotely. This team has to be in the office, right? And when you have that many employees, you are going to have a lot of employees that are just taking advantage of it. And it's hard to, again, police that type of policy and make sure that everyone's adhering to it. At a smaller institution where people wear many hats, where everyone knows where everybody is, right? it's
Uh-huh.
it's much easier to make sure that the work from home policies are not being taken advantage of.
Oh, that's a great perspective. I never would have even thought about it that way, but that's a really interesting perspective on that. How often does it come up in the interview? Like, is that a question that gets asked by the candidate? Are they asking about that? Is it on their list of things that, going back to your, how do you feel about your career 1 through 10? Is that on the list of the things that would make it a 10?
I would say the ability to work remotely when they want to is up there now. Yes.
It is. Okay.
People in general got used to having that type of flexibility. It is important to point out, though, that I'm going to say 50% of the people I talk to specifically tell me that they prefer to work in the office.
Oh, really? Okay.
And 50% prefer to have either to be fully remote or have flexibility. I think the pandemic and the fallout from the pandemic is that people figured out what works best for them.
Okay.
And when it comes to remote work.
All right. So let me ask you one curveball question there. Is there a difference by age in who prefers to work from home or not?
I honestly think that it's random.
You do? Okay.
If you read articles right now, you hear about the younger generation, really demanding it these days. And I don't know if that's completely true. Here's what I can tell you. I have had people that are close to retirement dig their heels in and say, I'm not going into an office again. And I have had people that are fresh out of school that do the exact same thing, right? The reasons that they're asking are vastly different. The reasons that someone who's close to retirement, an A player in their space, a seasoned banker, is because they know that they are going to work hard and that they are going to give their employer what their employer is asking for, but they just want flexibility, or they're potentially high risk, and they don't want to get COVID.
Oh, sure.
They've seen people, friends their age or older, negatively affected by COVID, and COVID is still around, right? And they dig their heels in and say, nope, it's not happening. The younger generation, they tend to dig their heels in because they think that they should have it for some reason.
Oh, yeah. It's a right or something.
It's what has been provided over the last few years, and they like that flexibility and they dig their heels in. The difference, in my opinion, is in the two types of individuals I just mentioned, is that someone who's starting their career, in my opinion and in my experience, the only way that they can actually grow and be a part of a culture and learn how to deal with people, employees, clients on a regular basis is to be in the office.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. That's a really good perspective. Yep. Because you haven't learned the things that the rest of us have been doing for the last 15 years, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas the
interpersonal
seasoned
communication
individual already has that experience, right? So
Yeah.
to them, from a career growth standpoint, like, I'm 60 years old. I know what I'm doing, right? You're going to get what you pay for. And I just want to work from home and do it from here.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Whereas the younger folks these days, I think that they're doing themselves a disservice by working from home.
I appreciate the perspective on that. Well, BJ, I appreciate you spending time with us. If I could ask my final question, I always ask something similar on BankTalk, but if a bank is looking to do a search, internal or, looking to use a consultant to do a search, whether that be retained, contingency, what have you, what's the best question they can ask? Or what kind of questions do you think is a good question to ask, either internally or externally, as to how to find that next COO or the next executive or what have you?
Okay. So Charlie, that's a loaded question. I'll do my best here. So I would say that whether you're conducting the search internally or utilizing an external search partner, share everything with each other, the good, the bad, the ugly, with the hiring team, with your search partner, just as you would share information with, say, your attorney. We cannot represent our partners effectively without knowing each and every detail about the institution, the department, the position, and the culture.
So all the warts, all the positives, all the negatives.
Exactly. Yes. And the second thing is communicate with your search partner or each other or the candidate in a timely fashion, and provide as many details as possible. Don't leave anybody in the dark because of your own selfish interests. I think that is where hiring managers, HR, internal recruiters, external recruiters, search partners fail. They keep the candidate in the dark, and that is it's a tremendous problem. It creates a reputational risk because people talk.
That's probably I don't want to call it paranoia on the candidate's part, but you start feeling insecure. And if you have more than one iron in the fire, you might lose the candidate for lack of communication, right?
Right. Yeah. And if you keep them at arm's length, they're going to keep you at arm's length. And then you're not going to know if they do have another fire. That's one of the things I always do when I'm talking to candidates. I let them know exactly where they stand. I tell them how many candidates there are competing against them. And I specifically ask for the same thing in return. I'm like, just let me know. It's okay. Let's treat each other like professionals. If we go into it very transparently and we're honest with each other, whether it works out or not, at least we could walk away as friends and we could possibly work together in the future. I think banks don't do that enough, and as far
That's a
as
great perspective. Yeah.
the information, we do not assume that we know as a search partner. Make sure that we know. It's our job to ask probing questions, which we do, and I do on a regular basis, but don't hold anything back. If there's an elephant in the room, let's hunt it together, address it, talk about it. No one's perfect. No institution is perfect. So if there are issues, let's discuss them so that we can proactively address each of those issues with prospective candidates before they become objections.
That's great perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, BJ, it's been great. I really appreciate you spending a little time with us. I mean, I think these are important issues, and there's probably another podcast in here at some point in the future. I think there's a lot of stuff we left uncovered, but just, like I said, I like hearing the perspective of somebody who understands that everybody's got warts, right?
None of us are perfect. We have to get all that stuff out in the open and talk about it.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us on BankTalk today.
Thanks, Charlie. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so that's it for BankTalk. Thank you for listening today. Have a good day and keep on learning.
Thank you for listening to the Bank Talk podcast brought to you by Remedy Consulting. If you're interested in more information on executive searches, please reach out to BJ on his LinkedIn or go to AJ Consultants website at ajconsultantsllc.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.